video, we're going to talk about the coaching conversation. This is sort of the planned part of the PDSA cycle. So, as I've said before, all coaching is, in my mind, fundamentally problem-solving coaching. You are helping somebody close a gap. But sometimes it feels more like problem-solving, and sometimes it doesn't, especially at the beginning. So how do you structure a coaching conversation in a way that leads you to be able to close gaps, leads you to be able to solve problems without inserting a lot of problem solving into the process? So there's a coaching conversation model called GROW that I treat as standard work. It's my standard work for how I think through such conversations. Now, like much standard work, it doesn't always happen in a linear way. It's not always step 1, 2, 3, 4 as you go through the process. But like any standard work, if I start in the wrong place or start in a different place or end up having to take a detour, I can recognize that I've taken a detour, I understand the consequences of that detour, and I can get back on course. So I may actually follow this in a linear way, perhaps 5 to 10% of the time. When I was earlier using this more often, I might use it 50% of the time as I was developing it as my standard work. But the point is, by having a standard for your coaching conversations, you can't always follow it because you're not the only one in that conversation, but it will provide a basis on which you can manage your own process. So, as we go through this process and understand the GROW model, GROW stands for goals, reality, options, and will. So let's walk through this one at a time. So goals is very much like a problem statement, right? What are you trying to accomplish? What gap are you trying to close? I believe it's also useful in this portion of the conversation to understand their goal for what they want from you. For example, if all they want to do is vent and they want an empathetic ear and you start trying to solve their problem for them, it might not be the most productive conversation. This is particularly where, if it hasn't happened already, you have the opportunity to say, are you open to some coaching? Can I coach you? This whatever words makes the most sense to you, but if you get a yes, it opens up all sorts of degrees of freedom to actually manage the process more deliberately. Now, we're often afraid to ask this question because we're afraid of the answer no. The reason we're afraid of the answer no is in part because they haven't asked for help. But I find that people are far more willing to accept help when it's offered than to proactively ask for help. And so that question, are you open to some coaching, is a tremendously powerful one that we don't use enough. Once we understand what they're trying to accomplish, then we get to understand reality, or the current reality. How do we understand what's actually occurred? What's the cause and effect of what we're trying to do? Now, again, we're not trying to do the problem solving in this conversation, so we're largely relying on their experience up to this point. So a simple line of questioning is, what have you tried and what was the result? What else have you tried and what was the result? If they haven't tried anything yet, you can ask for them to reflect on what their data is or why they haven't, or past conditions that were similar. Fundamentally, you're helping that person sort of dig into their current reality. Why is the gap existing today? Again, not true problem solving all the time, but that certainly helps us to do that. Now, in some coaching conversations, you stop there because they get stuck and they have to go and study, and they have to go and examine and do some investigation. That's fine if that's part of your arrangement of being a coach, but fundamentally, we have to get the current reality on the table. Options is another way to say brainstorming. Now, a couple important things to brainstorm ideas that we might use to overcome this gap is that these ultimately have to be their ideas. They don't all have to be their ideas, but they have to make the choice. This is not about us solving their problem for them. It's about them going forward with their own thought process. So we really work super hard here to push for ideas, for their ideas, for as many as possible. I think one of the most powerful tools to use here is silence. And you ask them what they could do, they might give you one or two things, and you just keep staring at them looking for more. And eventually they'll either completely quit because they don't have any more, and they'll tell you that, which we go on to plan B, or they come up with something else. Now, what's important here is volume for a couple of reasons. One is that you're helping them to be creative, to think through how to solve the problem. And they're much more able to do that when they start generating many ideas. Two, you want them to also practice selecting the right solution. It's much easier to select a solution out of 10 than just 1 out of 2, because 1 out of 2, I'm sort of painted into a corner. And three, what tends to happen with brainstorming is the first set of solutions, the first third of your solutions are the obvious ones. The next third is the impossible ones, and then only the final third is the truly creative ones. The point being, we kind of have to force ourselves through the obvious and the impossible to get to the creative. So as a coach, we help push them through that process. Now, we can certainly add ideas. I think the best way to do this is add a couple of ideas to help stoke their creativity, and then they build from there. The most important rule is we never offer only one suggestion, because it is now a suggestion. They have a different decision to make. Not which of these ideas do they select, but their first decision is, do I take my coach's idea or do I ignore it? That's not really the kind of thought process we want them learning how to make. And so fundamentally, we should always offer at least 2 if we're going to offer any, and maybe even 3 or 4. Make sure that we're not imposing our opinion of which idea they should select. Now, the other thing that I think is really valuable as a coach here is to put in ideas that perhaps are obvious, perhaps are ugly, but that frame the total picture. For example, if I'm coaching someone on having on a relationship they have with their boss, it might be that the right thing to do is have a difficult conversation. But I will put on the table the idea of quitting. Right? It's one way to resolve the gap, right? It's one way to resolve the problem is you can quit. Now, we don't want them to quit, but having a difficult conversation isn't an attractive solution. But when I understand it in the context of a larger set of solutions, which includes I could quit, it certainly starts to pop out as a really appealing idea. So help them in developing their set of options. Then it's time for them to quit, to act. And so this is really the will to act. We want them to have the will to act. It's their commitment. So one of the tricks that I've learned that I found quite effective is once they decide what they want to do, ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are they to do that actual thing? Well, if they say anything less than 10, well, there's a reason for that. They have a doubt. And it's very likely that that doubt is going to grow over time. And so I don't have data on this, but I believe that empirically, most people that say anything less than a 9 have a good chance of not following through. So as a coach, I ask them, what's it going to take to make it a 10? So let's return to that situation where the person has to have a difficult conversation with their boss. Well, they might be afraid of how it might go. As a coach, I could actually practice that conversation. I'll be the boss, you be you, let's practice the conversation. Is that what it's going to take to move you from a 9 or an 8 to a 10? So as a coach, you can help them gain the confidence in pursuing the action they decided to take. Now again, this is just standard work for how to actually have the conversation, but we have to understand how this fits in the larger scheme of things. Right? So what we're doing here is, this is really the plan part of the conversation. So everything we did with this was just standard work for how to have that conversation. And then we still have to go through the cycle of going through plan, do, study, act, as we talked about in other videos. And so use this as the basis of building your own standard work. I certainly find that finding your own rhythm, finding your own set of questions, finding your own standards is most effective. But perhaps the GROW model can help you begin to develop your standard work for how you have the plan of your coaching conversations. I wish you luck.